I worked in many companies before I founded Moolya. You ask me, did I understand any vision statement of any company as an employee? No, I had no clue. To be the best in the world in this particular space, and to be the visionary, to be the thought leader. I don't connect to any of that stuff. I mean, yes, it was there in the reception. So I walk in every day into the office. The vision statement and the mission statement was put in the reception. I see through it and walk in and go to my cubicle. I'm not able to connect to that. All right. Because it's all a lot of fancy words and stuff like that. I think what's very important is how do we simplify it? And this simplification and repetition are the two critical things that's important for us to scale.
Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. We curate wisdom from India's best founders, operators, and investors on this podcast. So, whatever your questions, whether it's learning how to do the 0 to 10 million in sales, or engaging and retaining users, or hiring your tech co founder, or learning how to operate in fintech or healthcare or any other domain, you have all the answers here from folks who have been there and done that. On this episode, I speak with Pradeep Soundararajan, who's the co founder and CEO of Moolya. Moolya has built one of the most passionate communities of testers and quality assurance folks, and I really admire their culture. So Pradeep and I spoke about how they managed to build just that. You can learn how to articulate and communicate culture, what are some of those processes and interventions that you can adopt, and more importantly, what do you do when things don't go your way? Culture makes or breaks an organization. As they say, it eats strategy for breakfast. I hope this podcast is as useful to you as it was for me. So let's get started on this episode of the Startup Operator Podcast with Pradeep Soundararajan. Hey Pradeep, welcome back to the Startup Operator Podcast. We don't have a lot of guests coming back for a second episode or a third episode. In that sense, this is a very unique experience for me and for you as well, I'm sure. So yeah.
Well, thanks to you and your commitment to make this happen. It's a great pleasure for me to come back and share perspectives that I have picked up over the years of doing whatever I'm doing. And best wishes to you and your team who's making this possible. I see a lot of people getting benefited from it. So congratulations on that. We can continue to do that.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, you were one of the early guests that I had on the podcast, and certainly one of the inspirations to keep it going as well. The last time you were on the podcast, we had a wide-ranging discussion on quality, engineering management, and so on and so forth. This episode of the Startup Operator Podcast is brought to you by Park Avenue. This podcast, we're going to have a very focused discussion on something that's super important for startups. I think it can really make or break teams, right? And that particular thing is culture. The last time we spoke, you said something that I have reflected upon for a long time afterwards, right? Which is that culture can eat strategy for a snack, right? And that's a very powerful statement. I've heard it said, right? I mean, alternately, as culture can eat strategy for breakfast, for lunch, etc. But the point is that while we have all of these processes, interventions, so on and so forth, there is something called culture which is in between the lines, which is implicit, which has to be articulated, which has to be communicated over and over again, which kind of defines what we do, right? And how we do things, more importantly. And so today we're going to focus on that. So, Pradeep, as someone who has been a founder for all these years, right? How do you define culture and why do you think it's important?
Culture is a way people think and behave to achieve a certain goal. There are many ways to squeeze success out of startups. Many ways. We know to do it. Now, the founders bring in a certain type of ways in which the goals are achieved. The best of the startups and the worst of the startups have the same success and the failure stories. But it is about how they get there that matters. So to me, culture is how people get to the goals. So typically we all focus, when it comes to startup, we all focus on what goals are they accomplishing. Like, okay, they are now a unicorn, their GMV is growing at this rate and all of that stuff. That's all the what part. But how are they getting there? That's what the culture is. So that's what I think.
Right. Yeah, so it is a means to an end and not an end in itself, right?
So it's a way of life. It's a way of life.
It's a way of life. Okay, heavy stuff. So it's the way you do things. It's a means to an end. Why is it important, Pradeep? Because I think, if I were to poll founders or operators and so on, uh, pretty much 100% of them would say that, culture is make or break and that it's super important. But why though? Is it one of those things that has been passed on as convention, that everyone has kind of drank the Kool-Aid like other things in startups, or is there something really to it? Why do you think it's important?
Okay, so whether people think it exists or not, there is always a kind of culture that exists in every place. Just to quote an example, okay, Elon Musk just yesterday wrote about the Twitter 2.0 and said, we all be ready to work extremely long hours and intense and all of that stuff, right? So there is always a culture. Now, whether people define it, recognize it, or are conscious of it or not, there's always a culture. Your question is, why is good culture important? Now, let me define what I mean by good, right? It can be the good, it can be, Elon Musk might come to, my company and say, this is a pretty bad culture. I might go to Twitter and say, this is a pretty bad culture, right? So here we are talking about different schools of thought about culture itself. So the funded companies operate in a certain way. The bootstrap companies operate in a certain way. So there are multiple ways in which culture exists in a lot of companies, whether they define it, whether they are conscious of it or not. Now, why is it important to build a sustainable culture? So it's not about even good or bad. It's about sustainable culture. And that's what I meant by good, is about the sustainability of the culture. Like, for instance, when Elon Musk, writes to people saying, you have to be able to work hard for long hours. How long can people sustain it? I mean, if people start falling sick and all of that stuff, they're going to fizzle out. They're not Elon Musk, right? So the sustainability point is where the problem is. Like, for instance, even marathon runners, they take enough rest before and after running the marathon. But if founders are expecting that their employees will work will run a marathon every day, that's not sustainable. They may be pushed to do that, but it's not sustainable. So here we're talking about sustainable culture. So if you were to title this podcast, we should talk about how to build sustainable culture, and not just about the culture itself.
Yeah, but it's also a matter of choice, right? I mean, it's also a matter of what you tend to privilege. For Elon Musk, of course, I mean, I think his life's mission is to solve the hardest problems in the world. And so, whether it is building rockets or electric cars, or building the town square for humanity, as he calls Twitter, I think those are his top of mind goals, right? But maybe somebody else might have a different goal of spending time with family, working on a particular vocation or a hobby or whatever else. So I guess in that sense, the kind of culture that you set in an organization also defines the kind of people that you surround yourself with, right? I mean, because it's a very self-selecting sort of mechanism, right? People who want to work with Elon for 80 hours or 100 hours on the factory floor at Tesla, right? They have a different ethos versus someone who wants to do good work but then has other facets of their life as well that they want to give importance to, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so true. Like, for instance, somebody who's desperate, who has no other choice, who has a family to take care of, and let's say Tesla working, what's 80, 90 hours a week is their only option, their only good option available to them, then they may make that choice. But if you look at it, it's not the people who make that choice, it's also the founders who make that choice, right? So there's a mindset that the founders actually bring in, okay, to work. And that is essentially what we're talking about Elon Musk, where he brings in saying, hey, this is the most important thing to do in life. And he's not talking about, is he going to be alive? Is this going to help him have a great old age? He's not worried about any of that stuff. He's saying, I am alive today and I have to solve this problem today. So that's a mindset, right? Then there is another mindset. Somebody like Sridhar Vembu is like saying, hey, I'm going to be alive for a longer time. My employees are going to be alive for a longer time, and I want them to live a life in a certain way, right?
Hmm.
So we are seeing two contrasting thought process coming into the founders, and I think Sridhar Vembu has achieved what Elon Musk has achieved, right? And many of the startups want to get there, right? So from that perspective, I think many different ways to get to the same goal. So that's what I'm saying, right? Okay, Elon Musk and Sridhar Vembu got to a certain level, but their paths, their chosen paths, are very different, and it truly reflects the kind of person the founder is. So when employees are prospecting to join a company, it's important to look at what the founder's mindset is, what the founder's thought process is, and based on that, see if it's suiting them or not suiting them.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think culture is important so that you can scale decision making, right? Whether you're a founder, leader, manager, you cannot be there at all times in all circumstances for your people, right?
Yeah.
Adjudicating what they have to do, whether it is choice A or choice B, right? And you can't also codify all of these things, right? Because you wish you can put everything in business rules, right? I mean, that if this, then that kind of a format, that doesn't really happen. And so I think culture is that sort of an implicit value mechanism that helps people make these decisions at scale, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that is why it's important, because on a daily basis we're making so many decisions, right? We're making so many value judgments, and from that perspective, having this one cohesive sort of alignment is a huge impact for startups and teams, for sure, right? Let's talk about, we're kind of sold on the fact that, culture is important. How do you go ahead and articulate and then communicate this culture to your people, right? And here again, there are various methods that people use, right? I mean, you've seen all of these, like you step into any of your startup offices or corporate offices, etc. You see all of these values written on the walls. Perhaps, I mean, you'll see some paraphernalia lying around in the lobby or in the cafe, etc., that you think about a certain value, right? I mean, whether it is excellence or quality or customer focus and mindset and so on and so forth, right? But is there something beyond all of that? I mean, how do you articulate in the simplest and most effective way what the culture of an organization is?
So to me, so the nature of the business that I am in, I work with plenty of founders, plenty of startups, and that's what our focus area is, right? One of the things that I've seen is the founders and the leadership teams die every 3 years and are reborn every 3 years. So for the first time founders, if you ask them to articulate, or during the first 3 years of founding a company, if you ask someone to articulate, they don't even know what it is. So they think there is a culture. I mean, I'm sure we all know that TT tables and graffiti. Okay, graffiti don't make up the culture. The free food, the free liquor, don't make up the culture. It's the way people operate on the floor, right? So from that perspective, I think that the founders go through this. So for me, in my journey, the first 3 years, I was never able to articulate the culture. I thought there was a certain culture. We start looking at the surface level things and start articulating. So every founder goes through a certain journey after a certain period of time where they start becoming conscious of the way things are happening, and that's when they start articulating, and that funnels in right from the founder, okay, to the people on the ground, and this involves the consciousness. So to me, the beginning point of articulation of the culture is about consciousness. Now, I'm not necessarily speaking spiritual, but yes, I am, because it's only conscious beings who can observe beyond the surface layer. So to me, the articulation begins being conscious and observing the way things are happening, and using that as a feedback to course correct and say, hey, this is what we are right now. This is what we want to be. So in the articulation that I have done, I've written, how were we in the past? What are we today? And what are the benefits and not so good things about today, and where do we need to be tomorrow? So this past, present, and future articulation is very critical in a journey of articulation itself, and this is a continuous process.
Right. So, one follow up on that, right? I mean, you could say that a culture is very intrinsic to the people of an organization. For instance, tomorrow, if I want to adopt Apple's culture of quality and design and so on, I don't think I can, immediately sort of adopt that, right? I mean, it's a function of people's backgrounds, the nature of the business that they're in, the market that they operate in, perhaps, I mean, the geography they're present in, and so on and so forth, right? So, is there also a sense of understanding who we are as a people, right? And what really drives us, which is, I guess, what you spoke, right? Which is that being conscious of who you are so that you can kind of observe what drives you.
Yes, yes. In the journey of being conscious, and I married that to the founder type. And I want to quote an example of a star who is among us in India. There's this guy called Suresh Kumar. He's running People right now, and he's famous all over LinkedIn and other places. Based on his background, based on where he comes from, and based on the kind of people that he wants to work with, he's been building a certain type of culture that can be admired but cannot be copied. And only Suresh can do that. Like the whole world is impressed with what he's doing. He had people like Vijay Shekhar Sharma, like call him over to the office and say, "Wow, you're building a great culture and this company that you're building." But Vijay Shekhar Sharma didn't say, "I'm going to change Paytm, because I'm inspired by you," right? So we can be inspired by great companies and great culture, but we can't copy it because it goes back to the leadership team and the founders and their background and their mindset and their thought process and their vision. So
No, I think even when I look at the culture that perhaps Moolya has, right? I think it's such a unique culture. I don't think that one can copy that as well. And again, it's a product of who you are, who your leadership team is, so and so on. So, is it necessary to have some kind of a narrative around this, saying that, hey, these are things that we appreciate, these are things we don't appreciate because we are X people or we are Y people? So having that broad overarching narrative in terms of who you are, what you do, is that really necessary for culture?
yeah, you would have heard of this, that culture hires and fires people, right? And I think that's the reason why we are continuously communicating about our, culture. It's to attract the right kind of people to apply. So we being a hardcore, passionate, tester-driven company, we are attracting passionate, testers. And this is so important for our, business also to grow and stuff like that. And also we like the company of passionate testers, as compared to people doing a job for the sake of it. So it is important for all organizations to articulate and to communicate the culture that is being practiced on the ground. And this culture articulation, right? It's not just about the founders or the marketing teams doing it. I can tell you this, right? No matter what company marketing teams talk about the culture, the HR team talks about the culture, right? The feedback that I have received from fellow founders is not based on what I spoke about the culture. It's what my employees spoke about the culture. It's what my employees speak. And recently one of the founder came to me and said, "Hey, how can I make my employees speak about the culture of the company?" Right. So it is the employees who communicate the culture to the world, not the marketing teams, not the HR teams. I mean, they do, but they don't. The world doesn't take them seriously when they're talking about the culture, and they hear the best when they hear it from the employees. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I think there's a Bezos quote on brand, which is quite similar, right? I mean, he says brand is what people talk about you when you're not in the room. And I think to an extent, like we've discussed, culture is very founder driven. It's very top down, but then it has to very quickly be adopted by all of the people in the organization, right? Because if you look at the touch points that a typical founder will have or a leadership team will have versus the typical touch points that the many people in the organization working on a daily basis will have, right? I mean, the latter will far outnumber the former, right? I mean, in that case, the kind of things that people practice on a daily basis will be far more than what a founder can talk about, perhaps at a town hall or at a catch up or an offsite or whatever else, right? Who should drive culture? We understand that, hey, culture should be adopted by everyone in the organization. And perhaps, I mean, we would all love to have 100% evangelists for the culture that we want. But are there some strategic ways of saying that, hey, here are 10 champions of our culture, and they will drive this forward through some kind of initiatives and so on?
Well, in the journey of startup, at different stages, different people drive the culture. Initially, it's of course the founders, then the core team, and once the startup reaches a certain level, it has to be that the employees drive the culture. It can't still be a founder driven culture. It still can't be a founder driven culture. If that is the case, then we spoke about the sustainability part of it, right? The sustainability heavily depends on the founder being available. And if the founder is not available, there's one culture. If the founder is available, there is one culture. So this will produce very sporadic results for the founder, for the founders actually what's it themselves. So to me, when the founder's goal is to get the culture driving part to the point where the employees drive the culture, and take a backseat and do the course correction. So today I consider myself as the guardian of the culture, not the driver of the culture. The employees are the driver of the culture, and I'm the guardian. And as a guardian, I course correct wherever I see there are deviations and stuff like that. So that is how I see this journey as.
Right. So, all right, let's go back to the drawing board, right? I mean, I have 5 or 10 people in my company and we're starting to grow, right? I expect that over the next couple of quarters, I will perhaps add 10, 15, 20 people. And I'm extremely paranoid about, how my team can outgrow whatever culture we have at this point of time, right? Which is basically all of the people sitting across the table. What are some initiatives and interventions that you can suggest to this person? How should that person go about articulating their culture and also communicating it to their team and also devising all of these interventions and so on?
Okay. The more simpler we make the articulation of culture, the more scalable, understandable it is for people. I worked in many companies before I founded Moolya. You ask me, did I understand any vision statement of any company as an employee? No, I had no clue. To be the best in the world in this particular space, and to be the visionary, to be the thought leader. I don't connect to any of that stuff. I mean, yes, it was there in the reception. So I walk in every day into the office. The vision statement and the mission statement was put in the reception. I see through it and walk in and go to my cubicle. I'm not able to connect to that. All right. Because it's all a lot of fancy words and stuff like that. I think what's very important is how do we simplify it? And this simplification and repetition are the two ways that we can enable others to precipitate it into the people as they continue to hire and as they continue to do. Now, we may have a lot of things, but we need to pick and choose those two critical things that's important for us to scale. So that's where I'd like to leave it.
No, I completely agree. I think simple is better than comprehensive. You would rather get it 80-20 right rather than trying to like over engineer it, which I see a lot of people doing. The last round in any interview for us is usually taken by someone who is not part of that particular team that is hiring, right? Because see, hey, we've all been in that situation where we're running a couple of hands and legs short, and as a hiring manager you're tempted to hire that person who's 80% good, right? Because 20% we will adjust, it's okay, I mean, we will figure it out types, right? But that kind of desperation that always kills us, right? Having someone who is a little more objective in the sense that, hey, I don't really need this person, but I want to evaluate them to see if they would be a fit for my team is amazing, right? I think Amazon has this filter wherein, they ask if, okay, are they good enough for your team? Are they good enough for any team in Amazon? So if you're effectively hiring someone, they should be good for any team in Amazon, right? From a culture perspective. And I think that is super important. And simply codifying this, right? Simply having a frame of reference is very important, right? Because I think left to our own devices, I think, yeah, I mean, implicitly we know who we want to hire, right? We want to hire the bestest, the brightest, the most hardworking, the most sincere, everything, right? We want to hire the Sharma ji ka betas and the betis in our team, right? But I think it goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond just simple good and bad. I think there are certain skills that you really have to identify, right? And you really have to look out for, right? And you won't just implicitly get that. Yeah, so those are a few things that I have noticed, and that we try to practice in the marketing team at Vibo for sure. Let's talk about when things go wrong, because I think invariably things do go wrong at some point of time, right? Irrespective of how careful you are, irrespective of how much effort you put into something like this, it can go wrong, right? And what do you do about it in that case? Can you talk about a few times when this thing has kind of spun out of control, right? When you felt like you were kind of losing the culture that you had built, and what did you do to sort of fix that?
It always keeps going wrong. So the current conjecture that I have is that every 30 people you add to the company, the culture changes. It's like adding 30 ml of whiskey to the water of, and every 30 ml you add, the water is no longer just the water, right? So it's always going wrong somewhere as the team is growing. Things absolutely are going wrong, whether we recognize it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, whether people are escalating it or not. So this is what I've understood about building a company, that shit's always hitting the roof, and only sometimes people talk about it. That's when we get to know about it, right? So for me, having acknowledged it, for me having been conscious of it, there are certain kinds of interventions and what's it, dipsticks, okay, that we do. Like for instance, when I hear pattern of problems, so this is what I tell people, and in my company, that look, I'm a firefighter. You bring me in when there is a smoke. So the first and foremost thing is, you all are empowered to fix it by yourself. You don't need me. But let's say in a rare case, you say, okay, I need the founder to fix this. Okay, great. I can come in and fix when there is a little bit of smoke, or let's say there's a little bit of fire. But if people wait for the whole building to catch the fire and call the founder can't do anything about it, right? Like, just sit back, relax, and watch the whole thing on fire. From the interventions perspective, what I realized is, since people don't talk about it all the time, we have to introduce the dipstick tests. So the dipstick tests are a monthly checks that I put into the company to assess how are things going on. So we have implemented Infido's Amber AI, and we set up certain questions based on our culture, based on our thought process, and all of that stuff, that pings people on Slack and asks about, what do you think is happening today? Okay, is this the way things are supposed to happen? And stuff like that. Now, whenever people give a certain response that's like, hey, I'm detecting a smoke, then the alarm bells go out to the respective leaders, and the alarms have to be, answered. There's no snooze button in the alarm. The alarm has to be stopped, and the only way to stop the alarm is this. And then on a monthly basis, I get to see the overall report of like how many alarm bells went, and I see if the leaders have acted on it, or if the leaders have not acted on it. Why is there a delay and stuff like that? So this, once a certain culture is set, and once we are hiring more and more people, things will absolutely go wrong. And it is, and I told you, right, since I play the role of the guardian of the culture and guardian of the value, these dipstick tests are very critical to continue to be in touch of the reality of where the culture is. Otherwise, if the worst thing that I've done in my life as a founder is to speak something absolutely disconnected to what the employees think about it on the ground, right? and I've made a joker out of myself. And that's the reason why this has transformed the way I do town halls these days. So previously, town halls was what Pradeep thinks Moolya is. Now I cut out all the crap. I don't care what Pradeep thinks. It's about what employees see. So if the more I speak that, the more they seem to connect to the reality. And I think so that's how this whole cycle is getting fixed for us.
Excellent. Yeah. This episode of the Startup Operator podcast is brought to you by Park Avenue. Now that we're all back at the office meeting colleagues and clients, it's time to ditch those PJs and look sharp with Park Avenue's range of 100% cotton, wrinkle free shirts. They're super easy to maintain and keep you looking fresh through the day. So, my fellow startup operators, visit the Park Avenue store on myraymond.com and check out the new wrinkle-free shirt collection. So we had a bit of an incident in my team, right? I mean, earlier this year, there were a certain number of people, a couple of folks on our team who had kind of drifted off, right? I mean, they were sort of building their own distinct culture in some sense, right? Which is fine. I mean, as you grow, I think this is going to happen, right, where some sets of people will have their own set of jokes and their own set of language and context and everything as a subset of your superset, right? But this subset culture, right, I mean, it was kind of at odds with our core culture, and that was a huge challenge. And I remember discussing this with the person, right? And I was assured that hey, nothing of that sort. And but the problems continued, right? And I think one of the problems that is immediate to perceive is when you have a you versus me kind of a thing flaring up, right? See, because I think getting two people to agree is difficult, right? Because everyone is so unique. But one thing that we practice as a team is that, hey, we're all in it for the same end reasons, right? For the same end goal, for the team to succeed, right? There is something greater than our individual aspirations here, right? But when it devolves into, no, this is my priority, and this is how I see it, and you are wrong, etc., right? And when it comes into like a very much like a you versus me sort of a thing, that is when I think alarm bells go off. And the team had kind of hid it from me for quite a while, right? And so I did not see any smoke until I see like a huge fire burning, right? When a campaign that was supposed to go live, I don't know, in a couple of weeks was delayed by almost 2 months, right? I kind of tried to understand why that was the case, right? And on digging deeper, I mean, I found this huge problem. And people thought I was crazy for taking it so seriously, but it really hurt me actually, because I think one of the reasons I go to work, one of the reasons I enjoy working where I work is because of the team. It's the people that I work with, it's the people that I vibe with, etc. I think that's just such a fulfilling part of my work, really. And so having the difficult conversation, right, with those folks and letting them know that this was not appreciated, etc. I mean, it so happened that later on they quit earlier this year, but having that conversation, taking that seriously, taught me a valuable lesson that I can never take that for granted. I can never ever take that for granted. And the signs are always there, but you just choose to be optimistic about it, or you just choose to turn a blind eye thinking that, hey, things will work itself out. And that is a huge problem, right? And that's a huge problem. I think you'd rather be very paranoid about these things than sort of take it lightly. Yeah. And here again, creating people who are evangelists, who care, if not as much as you do, but at least to a reasonable extent, right, is very important. Really, really important, because you cannot be there everywhere. So I think having those evangelists is certainly important.
You shared an absolute brilliant story. You shared an absolute important, brilliant story. I think, I see this as a very important story when we are talking about the culture. All right. The subcultures, there's always subcultures happening. Now,
Yeah.
for us as leaders, when we see that the subculture is producing a good result, we sometimes are very tempted to turn a blind eye to it. And this subculture produces a certain results. But then when it starts to block every other's progress, this subculture that produced this result becomes a localized result and a company disaster. I've experienced this and you've experienced this. And that's the reason why I recognize it in saying that this is a beautiful story that you shared. And hats off to you for sharing that story. It's
No, I think, all of us have been through that, I suppose. And that's why, I mean, I think, to an extent we can relate to that. But it's important, I realize, to recognize it as soon as possible and do something about it before it kind of gets out of hand, right? I think, it's hard enough building and sustaining culture, but I think it's become way more difficult in the times of remote, right? Because I think a lot of culture is gained through osmosis, right? I look at my colleagues, I look at my seniors, I look at my leaders, etc., and there's a certain thing that I kind of imbibe from them, right? There is a certain way they send emails, there's a certain way they behave around the water cooler, there is a certain way they talk to colleagues, they talk to clients, etc., right? And there is so much I'm gaining from all of this non-verbal or non-explicit communication, right? But I feel like in the times of remote we're missing that, right? I mean, everyone is behind these Zoom screens, and it's really hard to transmit that last mile of what you expect to someone, right? So what are some ways that you have sort of figured to communicate your culture during the times of COVID?
Yeah, the remote work certainly has disrupted the culture that many companies have had set. While remote work is great to do focused work. So, right now I'm writing a book on the Moolya way of testing. So if I'm not going to office and writing, it's the best thing to do. I can sit anywhere and write. So that is lovely. But if I have to, collaborate with people and then write a book, I can't be writing it remotely because the fun of writing the book is in talking to people when it's being written in a collaborative way. And the fun, like right? See, you and I have done walks together, have worked out together, and are doing this call together. Where did we smile the most is when we met in person,
Yeah.
right? When we met in person, when we walked together, when we worked out together, is where we actually smiled and laughed the most, right? And that is what life is. Now, what this remote work has done is that smiles, that laughter, that joy is gone. There's a lot of work. 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 For people just obsessed with results, remote work is fabulous. For people who are looking at a balance of life and results, this is disastrous because there's so much work that it's impeding into the life itself. Now, how has it affected us? First, we didn't know that it would affect to the level that it got affected. The second thing is that, see, it's very difficult to track what one-on-one conversations are happening on a Slack, and this is the same team members who were previously okay at work. Now a large part of why Moolya was because people looked at the senior Moolyans and behaved and course corrected themselves just looking at how two people talk to each other at work.
Yeah.
Now, how two people talk to each other at work is happening via Slack, and the others are not looking at it. So, from that sense, there is no observability, there is no tacitness. So, without tacitness, every great culture breaks down. Every great culture actually breaks down. And what will happen is it's like people are becoming more and more plastic to work with. Over a period of time, there will be that loss of, look at how many depression cases, how many mental health issues came up during the remote work, right? During the pandemic, when we could not see each other, when we could not, talk to each other. Now, at least I'm glad we're able to travel, talk, and meet in person and all of that stuff. So I think it's very important for people to connect. Now, one of the things that I realized is people were not willing to come to office and work, but if there was an offsite event to Goa and other places, they were all ready to come and spend 2-3 weeks over there, right? Which essentially means that people want to meet people want to party with people want to enjoy with people, but they are missing the point that the key to ease of getting things done exists by close interaction, with people. So, right now, thanks to the COVID not being there as much as it used to be, people are, ready to come to offices and work. So we have adopted a hybrid model where it's important for people to come and connect with the team members and then, go back. And because of this, we've also set up offices across India right now, because right now people are all spread. And not everybody is relocating to Bangalore. And also we have customers all across India. So we have set up all different offices, and we want at least them to go to their local offices and connect with people. And that's the only way that we can fix it. Purely remote, it will change the culture of the company completely. And we have to think of culture as new, which is also what we have done. We said, okay, we now have to alter things in such a way that we can still bring in the values that we got in the non-remote world into the hybrid world. So
Yeah. No, I kind of agree. I knew someone who worked for Zapier, right? And Zapier is famously remote first, even before the pandemic, right? And yeah, this person worked there for about 4 or 5 years, but was so burnt out at the end of it, right? Even though, I mean, he would, have those 1 or 2 trips to, SF, where he would meet all of his colleagues from across the world, and they would have meetups otherwise as well. But just the fact that you're not communicating with humans in person, right? I think it has a huge impact, because I do believe that you cannot do meaningful collaborative work at an arm's distance, certainly not virtually, right? So there is something to, Elon Musk, for example, insisting that, hey, we're doing the most meaningful work of our life, I want you on the factory floor, right? um,
absolutely.
so yeah, I mean, I think
When I say, when certain people hear this, they'll think that you and I are talking like, oh, these guys are employers, so they want people to come to work. No, no. I just want to clarify, if for those who are watching this right now, and if you think that we are people obsessed to bringing you to office and screwing up your work-life balance, no. Both Roshan and I are the most pro-life people in the business. I'm not, saying this, just out of like, I want to be making a fancy statement out here, but it's the truth, thing. We want life, for people. And using this, I want to share this, with you, Roshan. There's a friend of mine who is a doctor, and she asked me this question, saying, okay, Pradeep, why are engineers so much excited about going out on the weekends, bird photography, animal photography, but doctors, I don't see that happening much, right? And then and then she also told me that doctors, by nature of their profession, they have to touch humans every moment, right? They can't say, I'll do remote operation. She said that, hey, we are in touch with people every moment. And that's probably the reason why doctors, relative to engineers, relative to software engineers, have lesser depression cases, lesser mental health issues, and all of that stuff. Even I've spoken to some of my friends who are, psychiatrists, and one question I ask them is, you know, so of course I call him, hey guy, like, hey, you deal with people who are constantly complaining about mental health issues. How is your mental health? He says, see, I get to hear them and all of that stuff, and it also makes me conscious of why and how people got into it. But I do my routine to keep my mental health, going well. So even doctors who listen to a lot of people with mental health issues don't get into mental health issues, and and again, because of the human connect part of it. So I think the human connect is going to be a vital role in making things happen and keeping humans to be humans.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. 100%. So, Pradeep, what are some companies that you look up to in terms of having a great culture?
Okay, great sustainable culture, right? So Zoho is a
Yeah,
wonderful company. So we all talk about inclusivity. We all talk about inclusivity, right? I think Zoho has demonstrated inclusivity by having offices in villages and bringing those people into a comfortable workplace there. So there's a Coimbatore office, there's a Bangalore office, there's a Chennai office, there is all other offices, which brings in inclusivity over there. So that's one. Okay, the second thing is I mentioned about, okay, Suresh Kumar, right? Suresh Kumar building, people is also, okay, building a very sustainable culture for his style of things. And he's inspired a lot of people to think about building such culture. And, as we discussed, It's hard to replicate, but Suresh has been sustaining this culture over the last, decade. The other example, that I'll use is, what's it? I wrote a feedback, okay, to Infido, Tanmaya, the founder, and the way he handled the feedback and the way he brought his team in, and the way he took a step back to let his team talk to me and analyze and all of that stuff. So that I felt was a very good example of a culture. The other thing is also, there are many startups that we have worked with in the past, and I've seen brilliance brilliance of culture in many different places at many different times. For example, some startups were really a beautiful culture when they were like pre-series B, and post-series B their culture totally changed and all of that stuff. So I think the sustainability of the culture is hard, but we see that companies who have a long-term vision have a sustainable culture. Companies who have a short-term vision and founders who have a short-term vision, they have an unsustainable culture. So this is how I'd classify that as.
From my perspective, Zoho for sure, right? I really love the fact that they're so original about things, right? They don't really give a shit about what someone thinks about them, right? They're going to do things their way, right? Whether it is bootstrapping to $1 billion in revenue, whether it is adopting this very village lifestyle into their workplace, or whether it is even treating people as human beings first and then professionals next, right? I've interviewed many folks from Zoho, and unanimously, right? I mean, unanimously, I can't find a single person who says anything bad. Literally, I mean, everyone I've spoken to says that this has been a fantastic experience, right? I had Praval of Zoho on the podcast earlier. He heads marketing there, and he was saying that something like, I don't know, 100 people or more, right, have 10 plus years of experience in Zoho, right? You can imagine that. That's just phenomenal, right? I mean, think about the amount of institutional knowledge that they have, right, because of this. So yeah, that's fantastic. Back in the day, really used to look up to McKinsey's culture of excellence as well, right? Because the business that they're in, especially, right? I mean, they're literally billing you for hours, and the amount of rigor that they would have, that they would practice in their approach to solving problems in various domains and so on, that is something that I would really look up to, right? um, but yeah, I mean, these things as well change as you scale, right? I mean, I remember one of those startups that I kind of looked up to. I've been talking to a few people, and they say that the culture is no longer what it was earlier, right? And we hear of these things, with some of the big tech companies as well, right? Whether it's Meta or Google or Amazon and so on.
Including Moolya, I'll tell you. So we had a one type of culture, and then I became conscious of like the good and bad things of it, and decided to reinvent it and all of that stuff. Some of the ex-employees who joined in, they were like, Pradeep, it's no longer the Moolya. I'm like, yeah, I know it's no longer the Moolya, and if we continue that way, we can't also scale, and we can't build a sustainable thing. So there are certain kind of people who enjoy certain kind of culture, right? Which is the reason why the culture hires and fires certain kind of people. And these people, when they came back, they were like shocked. Oh my God, this is not the Moolya that I was expecting. I was like, yeah, this is not the Moolya that you were expecting, but you embraced it and became a part of it. And here is the time. And my job is to provide you the necessary support and the time frame, okay, to embrace it. And the time frame is a very critical thing that you spoke about when it comes to Zoho
Yeah.
part of it, right? It's like, for example, even you, right? You have spent enough years in Waymo, and you are also a culture champion of Waymo. It's not just Yamini who is the culture champion of Waymo, and people like you. So a lot of people get to interact with leaders like you more and less of Yamini. So you are the ones who are actually spreading and expanding the culture and all of that stuff. So it's important for people to stick around to become culture guardians and champions and drivers,
Yeah.
and people who come in and go. as a transaction, they're never going to be the culture champions in any company. So
Yeah.
that is the key part. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, no, a very important point. Yeah, for sure. That's all the things that I wanted to discuss. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Pradeep? Any final thoughts on, how to practice great culture and what people should perhaps emulate?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the time, and this was really a very good conversation. Okay, that I had. I think you dropped in a lot of great wisdom, and so thanks to you for that as well. And for me, as I began, I'm going to end with the same thing that I began, right? So it's important for people to be conscious of what culture they are building, fostering, rewarding, or wanting to course correct. So it all begins with consciousness. The more oblivious we are about our culture, the more ignorant we are, the more overconfident we are about our culture, or being disconnected from the way things are happening to the ground and wanting to make fancy statements are a problem. So it's important to connect. It's important to be conscious. So the first thing is to practice that consciousness. The second thing is about, once conscious, knowing, do we have a short term vision or a long term vision, and based on that, I think the culture can be set and all of that stuff. So to me, if people take care of these two things, I'm just when I say people, these are the founder community that I'm talking about. If they take care of these two things, they are largely good. And also, since I mentioned this in the beginning, making it very simple to articulate, making it very simple to understand in less than a few words. If they can explain what their culture is, what their company vision is, and all of that stuff, this will work great with employees. Okay, and to people who are employees, if the culture is not going good, okay, in the company, the first and the foremost thing to do is to not quit. The first and foremost thing to do is to fix the culture. Because if we start running away from bad culture, then we are a kangaroo. We are not an employee. We are a kangaroo. We'll keep hopping, 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 hopping. So it's important to fix. Now, if the leaders say, I don't want you to change the culture, then you quit. If the leader says, hey, I want you to bring this culture in, then that's the company to settle in for a long time. So that is how I'd like to
Yeah.
conclude, and gratitude to you, and best wishes to everyone to build sustainable cultures.
Any books, Pradeep? I mean, any books or things that you would recommend in terms of resources for people to read up about?
Macintosh Way by Guy Kawasaki was the first book on culture of building the Macintosh that I read, which truly inspired me. These days, are people reading books, Roshan?
Yeah, they are.
uh, if
They are.
there are a
Oddly
few
enough, they are.
people, you know what? Those people who are reading the books would have read those books that I'm about to suggest any which way. So instead, I would say, follow certain people on LinkedIn. Follow Suresh. Follow Sridhar Vembu on Twitter. Okay, Naval Ravikant. He's also a great guy to follow the wisdom, and I think he speaks a good balance of life. And then everyone has to find their own spiritual gurus to follow with, because all of these folks are also talking about culture. They may not be talking about culture of the company. They're talking about how to work with humans. And I think be it the Bhagavad Gita or the Ramayana, or whatever scriptures for different religions, be it the Bible or the Quran, everything is talking about working with other people. That's all it is. If you take the Bible and you say how to deal with friends, you can search for love quotes, and friendship quotes and everything, right? So this is all the whole like generations of people have only written about working with people. And I think so these are some of the stuff that, okay, people can actually pick up from. That's what I would say, instead of suggesting these books.
Yeah, so I would suggest, again, might be unusual from a culture perspective, but I would suggest Clayton Christensen's How Do You Measure Your Life? I think that's what it's called. I read this at a point where I had made all of my life about work, right? And I was, that's where I was getting most of my meaning from. And this book really helped me gain perspective in terms of, hey, there are so many other facets of your life, and you should not be as myopic as basing everything about your life on one particular aspect, right? I think that's a great book that kind of gives you perspective. And as I think Pradeep also mentioned earlier, right? I mean, having that understanding about yourself goes a long way in terms of dealing with others in your company as well, right? No, this has been a fun chat, as always, right? I mean, we have these long chats about everything and nothing at all. And it was great jamming with you on culture, something that we're both deeply passionate about. Hopefully, people who are listening to it, got one or two things that they could start implementing at their workplace as well. And of course, we'll link to Pradeep's social handles and in the description. Do follow him. He's an extremely interesting person to be in touch with. So there you have it. I hope you liked this podcast. In this segment of the Park Avenue PowerPoints, we review some of the highlights of the conversation. So, number one, culture is a way of life. People and startups have goals, and how people reach them is through culture. Culture, in that sense, is a means to an end. It is a way to scale decision making, and as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Number two, it's important to articulate and communicate culture actively to your employees. Do not assume that implicit communication will work. And to do this, you have to reflect on the kind of company you are, what drives you, what drives the people around you, and be real about the things you want to codify and promote. And you have to do that actively. Number three, simplification and repetition are two important tools that you have to scale culture. And on the contrary, complicated, unrelated vision statements don't really work. You have to keep things simple enough that everyone gets it, and also engineer interventions across everything you do so it's easily adopted. Number four, as the company grows, things will eventually go wrong. And as guardians of the culture, dipstick tests are important to keep the founders grounded and in touch with reality, especially in these times of remote work that limits in person interactions. And finally, number five, it's important to create champions of culture. These could be folks who have spent a significant time in your organization and relate to your values intrinsically. Make them ambassadors for what you would like to see in the org. That's it, folks. I hope you liked this episode. If you did, don't forget to rate and review us so more people can discover our content. I'll see you on another episode with another amazing guest. Take care. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform. Also get updates delivered straight to your WhatsApp inbox by clicking on the link in the description.